What would you say you do here?
Well, look, I already told you. I deal with the goddamn customers so the engineers don't have to. I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people. Can't you understand that? What the hell is wrong with you people?
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. We've got another interview with Adventures in Poor Taste for X-Men Monday. Jordan White has once again returned to spill the beans. At this point, I think he would probably be wise on his part and to just stop doing these interviews. I don't think he presents himself all that well. This time, I guess he's running damage control for the X-Men Green story that I covered right here on the channel. It was heavily covered in a lot of places. Not very many people were very happy with that story, and I completely agree. I don't think it was well executed. I think they did what they wanted to do. I don't think they anticipated that two children running around murdering people left and right because they found a plastic bag over a turtle's face was going to be quite the heroic journey that they imagined it was, that people just weren't going to resonate with and weren't going to respond well to it. So for some reason, they send Jordan White out, who I don't listen, I've heard he's a nice guy. I've heard he's very knowledgeable. I do not think he ever makes a good accounting of himself when he's out there speaking. I just don't think not everyone's a good interview. You know what I'm saying? Not everyone is able to articulate themselves or, I don't know, read the temperature of the room to where you can answer these questions and not make yourself look like a goofball. I'm going to read. It's a long interview, and it's not just about X-Men Green. It's about X-Men Unlimited, which obviously X-Men Green was a story arc in there. So there's a lot into that. I'm not going to cover any of that stuff. I'm only going to cover the questions associated with X-Men Green. I'm going to cover the question, the answer, and the answers are very long. And then I'm going to give my thoughts. I'll be as brief as I possibly can. We'll see how good I'm on that one. I imagine this is going to be a little bit of a longer video. And, I'll have some spots about leadership and stuff like that where I really think he's faltering. Now let's get into the questions from Adventures in Poor Taste. The first one is, circling back to X-Men Green, this was such a bold story with actual consequences for Nature Girl. How did it come about? I don't remember the consequences, but let's hear what Jordan has to say. Oh, yeah. This is another one of those stories that when Jerry pitched it, I went, no, of course, we're not doing that. And he laughs. What's interesting here, and there's more to this answer, but I'll stop here. As a leader and as the group editor for X-Men, his gut instinct, his first reaction was the correct one. This isn't a story that likely accentuates any of our characters. It's not heroic. Does this need to be told? Are we turning Nature Girl into one of the worst villains in Marvel Comics? And that's certainly not how the story is written. And as the lead editor over that, obviously he has an assistant editor, but he's already said, I'm the guy in charge of X-Men Limited. Like, he should know that this wasn't going to land well, but he knew initially, as a group editor, as a leader, this is a bad idea. And he said, no, we're not going to do that. Unfortunately, Jordan White is a bit of a pushover. So let's continue on with his answer here. I can't remember when he pitched this. This was very early in our planning of the Krakoan era after starting House of X. He came to one of our summits and he pitched the entire concept of the first chapter of X-Men Green. The turtle dying in the bag and going through the gate and murder. And again, I was just like, no, what are you talking about? How could we do that? That's crazy. So his instincts were right as a leader. No, you can't do that. Unfortunately, as he continues, he gets talked into it. But first of all, Jonathan loved it. Jonathan was like cackling the entire time Jerry was telling it. Second of all, as he talked through the story beyond that, it got really cool and interesting. And it was just obviously very dark, but a fascinating place to go with that character. He won us over and we said yes. There are attempts at humor within the story, but it's certainly not written as a satire or any type of like a parody piece, or even it doesn't read as funny. So maybe when Jerry was pitching it, there were some humorous elements to it. But that doesn't translate to the story. He was the editor on it. He should have known that. And then because As a leader, it is your job to say no. And I remember one time there was a guy that worked for me, and he had gotten in trouble 2 years before I had arrived in the unit, and it was time for him to leave, and he wanted an end-of-tour award, and he'd done great work for me, and I'd known that he had gotten in trouble. And I submitted the end-of-tour, knowing it wouldn't get approved. I knew it wouldn't get approved. This is my failure as a leader. And I got taken into my superintendent's office, and she said, "Tech Sergeant, why is this package on my desk? Why has this been put up for an end-of-tour award? You were aware what Staff Sergeant so-and-so did, got in a lot of trouble, embarrassed the unit." Well, I said, "Well, he's done really great work, and I wanted to know that I appreciated what he did, so I thought I would put it up here." And she said, "So you knew this wasn't going to get approved?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "It's your job to say no. It's your job to tell him that what he did was wrong, and there are consequences for that go beyond just in the moment. And at the end of his tour here, there is no award for him." And she goes, "You should never, ever be in my office for this reason again, because you knew I would never approve it, and you knew you should say no." Obviously, I was I wasn't a young leader, but I let my people get the best of me at that point, and I learned a valuable lesson. Unfortunately, it sounds like Jordan White has not learned that lesson yet. He might be learning it now with all the negative press and feedback that he got for it. But as a leader, you're literally being paid to say no to bad ideas, or to say no to the things that are going to embarrass your publisher, embarrass your line, embarrass your characters. And Jordan White, that is his job. That's what he's being paid to do, besides just manage everything, is to tell people no on bad ideas. He knew he should have. He knew he should have said no, and he let himself get talked into it. That's a failure of leadership. The next question. Nature Girl was right. What do you think? Is Nature Girl a villain? And this is what his answer is, and this one's pretty telling. Well, I think that's the complication, and I think that's a question that's been asked about a lot of characters over the course of the X-Men. Absolutely. A lot of people think that the entire Krakoan age, all the X-Men are villains now. I think that this is a much more extreme one. Her purposes are purposes that obviously a lot of people will agree with. She's saying we're damaging the earth, and this is a problem. And we're damaging the environment, and this is a problem. Her solution involves scissors in the neck, and that's not great. And then he laughs. To say that's not right is a complicated thing. It's not complicated. You can see he's still justifying the story as not being villainous. He's still trying to justify the behavior of the character in the story that he wrote. And there's some at least one comparison later on that kind of proves my point again. This isn't a complicated thing. If you find a plastic bag on an animal's head, and then you find the logo on it, and then you go to that convenience store and you stab somebody in the neck, that's not complicated. You're a fucking murderer. You're a terrible person, and you deserve to be in prison for a very long time. That's not complicated. There's nothing complicated, and that's the problem with the story, is they didn't present Nature Girl and Curse as the villains. They never felt any remorse. They felt justified in what they were doing, and you can tell that the writer and the editorial staff also felt like the characters were justified in what they were doing, and it was complicated. It wasn't complicated. That's the problem. And the fact that Jordan White can't see this, because obviously his name's on it and it's been put out there, he can't admit that he was wrong. That's a problem. He continues, I don't think she's right in the sense that her solution is bad. You know what's the best way to stop humans from polluting the earth? Well, if you kill all the humans, that would do it. Does that make it right to do? No, there's a balance. She's not killing everybody, making more excuses for the character. She's killing a lot of people, though. So no, I don't think she's right. Is she a villain? Yeah, probably. Not probably. Yes. She murdered some dude that was working some shitty 9-to-5 clerk job by stabbing in the neck with scissors. She compelled animals against their will to go attack oil pipe workers, probably one of the most physically straining jobs there is, and had them murder them. Not probably, yes. And then he continues. This is one of the bad comparisons. I mean, isn't that Ra's al Ghul's motivation? Yes, Ra's al Ghul wants to bring balance to the environment, or to the earth, and believes that killing humans is the way to achieve it. Ra's al Ghul is never portrayed as a hero. Ra's al Ghul is never portrayed as someone that's justified in his actions. Every hero and every person that comes in contact with Ra's al Ghul, or that's not bad, goes against him or tells him that he's wrong. No one ever tells these characters that they're wrong. They're not presented as evil. Ra's al Ghul is presented as absolutely evil. And that's the mistake here. You could have, if that's what the story that they wanted to do, they had to craft it that way, but they didn't. That's the big mistake, and he can't get it through his thick head. The next question. In the Krakoa era, she's one of the mutants to break one of the island's 3 laws and stay in trial for it. She being, obviously, Nature Girl. Jordan says, and that's the problem with the terminology like that. Villainous, right? What's the problem with the term villain? She literally went out there and murdered a guy who was trying to make money and support his wife and children, probably. She went out there and murdered pipeline workers. And the only people that are aiding her along the way is this absolutely insane kid and a couple more villains. What's the problem with that terminology? He continues. She has broken the laws of Krakoa flagrantly, 100%. She doesn't do it for traditionally villainous reasons like power or money. Absolutely she does. She does it because she can. That's you can see in his mind, it's okay, or it's somewhat justified to go out there and murder people because there was a piece of trash in the ocean. That's crazy behavior. That is an absolute insane motivation for a character. That is villainous. It continues. Again, she's going about it from a worse place, but she's almost more like the Authority, right? Are the Authority villains? Well, no, but they do resort to sort of take over the world. Is that good? Are the Authority hero? I don't think we're supposed to be rooting for the Authority. Like they take things too far. They're what the Justice League would be if they had no respect for humanity or no restraint. That's the juxtaposition of the characters. I don't think we're supposed to be rooting for the Authority to win, and we're certainly not supposed to be rooting for Nature Girl to win. And that's Jordan White and Jerry Duggan's problem. They don't realize they just wrote a very villainous character and turned her into an enormous villain. There's nothing redeeming about anything that the character does. Just because the source of the motivation of the villain is understandable, it's the actions that understandable origin predicates that determines if the character is going to be a hero or a villain. And sometimes there's some gray area in this. And he doesn't understand. Just because the origin or your motivation is understandable, once you cross the line and you just start murdering people, you're evil. The character is evil. The character is a villain. And that's one of the major problems right now with comic books. There's almost no delineation between heroes and villains anymore. Well, Magneto's got a very tragic origin story. How come he's the villain? Because he took his motivation and he used it to propagate evil intentions. Other characters that might have a similar origin to him and do it in a more heroic way. That's delineation, but they're bringing them so much closer that you're rooting for the villain a lot of times and hoping the hero fails because they don't know how to properly write heroes. They don't know how to properly write villains. And that's why the stories don't work. because when they come into conflict, you confuse the reader. And this has been going on for a long time. Jordan White is part of the problem. This is a symptom of a much larger problem with comic books. And the fact that I'm reading this interview here, and he can't get it through his head, even with the feedback and the pushback that Marvel Comics and the X-Men line got for the X-Men Green story arc, he still can't bring himself to admit the character's actions were wrong. Tell me that's not a problem. That's a problem for Marvel Comics. That's a problem for X-Men. That is a problem for comic books as a whole that they need to address and overcome. Superhero stories are good versus evil. Sometimes there are characters that work in a gray space. But even then, you can understand what the Punisher's doing, but you shouldn't want him to do that. Like, what he's doing is wrong. And he's a self-loathing character. He knows what he's doing is wrong. He knows that he's he's messed up in the head. He doesn't justify his actions to everybody else. He doesn't sit there and say, I was right all along. He knows what he's going over the line. He just knows he can't stop himself. And that's the problem here. Jordan White doesn't realize the character that he and Jerry Duggan have created, or at least a story with the characters they've created. They continue. AIPT. But it's a story, and in the story, she's more in touch with nature than others due to her power. So you can see that even the interviewer from Adventures in Poor Taste has a problem identifying what Nature Girl was doing was wrong. So she has a reason for doing what she did, see? And you see Krakoa, too, isn't in favor of the council's ruling, because Krakoa and Doug do release him, and the interviewer says Doug is sympathetic as well. This is Jordan's response. Right. It's probably darker than most of the things we've done, but she's not alone in the current era as being a kind of anti-hero. She's not an anti-hero. An anti-hero is a character who has proclivities or selfish motivations to where they do not want to do things in the greater good. But in the end, when push comes to shove, they put their own selfish desires and needs on the back burner and they do what's right. Right? That's the anti-hero. Not exactly living up to the call to action, but when the action happens, they finally make a decision. The anti-hero isn't somebody who has a stimulus to act and then goes out and murders people for no reason. They don't understand what an anti-hero is anymore. And he continues, who people can read about and decide whether they root for her in the story or not. They shouldn't be root for her. This is the group editor for X-Men. This is one of the major, the most powerful editors in all Marvel Comics, card-carrying member of the Legion of Doofuses. There's a reason I gave him that title. And every time he speaks, he just proves it and proves it and proves it. He continues, I mean, right now, a lot of people are very excited about what Mystique is doing. Let's not forget what Mystique wants. What she wants is her wife back. Totally great. She's not doing great stuff all over the place to make that happen. And also, she's a very selfish person. She's killed a lot of people, too, and she would not hesitate to do it again. She has definitely killed people in the past. Mystique has always, for the most part, been a villain. Within the Krakoan age, when we saw the first act, when Sabretooth was murdering people, she was there, and she didn't kill anybody. And to my knowledge, she hasn't killed anybody since then. In fact, she's actually put herself at risk. She's an anti-hero in this story. She has selfish motivations or whatever, and because she wants to return her wife to be resurrected with a deal with Charles and Magneto, she puts herself at great harm, goes up to the Orcus spaceship, and tries to blow it up, tries to sabotage it, ends up getting herself killed. And she's lied to multiple times. Charles and Magneto know that they're never going to fulfill their duty. Eventually, she goes around them, resurrected her wife and then manipulated the council. Now, that's not great stuff, but that's not going out and murdering clerks. because she heard a rumor that you might have been aware that her wife wasn't resurrected. You know what I mean? The comparison, at least what's happening on Krakoa right now between Mystique and Nature Girl, is not even valid. And Mystique is an anti-hero in the story that we're reading, but Nature Girl isn't presented that way. Jordan White doesn't understand that. This is the last question. I know I've gone on too long. The interviewer asked, and Kurz, she's definitely bad news. And Jordan says, I love Kurz. Well, who wouldn't love a 9-year-old mutant that's going around cheering on her friend that's murdering people and then, participating in said murder later on? What's there not to love about that character? We have a sociopathic, prepubescent mutant girl that feels no remorse or guilt for going out and murdering people for no reason. What's not to love about that character? And I'm not saying you can't have fun with a character like that, but I don't think that's how he means it. And I don't think that he understands that she's a villain. He says, that's a character I'm really happy became a thing because she grew out of nothing. Her first appearance was, oh, this is Curse. Here's what her deal is. It was literally just Jerry writing a scene where some kid says something to Kate. We liked that scene. It was delightful, and therefore she kept coming back. Well, that's great, that you were able to create a character that became recurring that you had no plans with. But the character should be sent to the pits of Krakoa next to Sabretooth. She's a sociopathic murderer. But, they love the character. She's a hero, right? He really should stop talking because he does make himself, and he does not set. I don't think he does himself, Marvel Comics or X-Men, any favors going out here and speak. He does not know how to talk to media. He does not know how to answer questions in a way that presents himself in his office in a positive light. It's clear here he knows nothing about heroes. He knows nothing about villains. He knows nothing about anti-heroes. Yet this is the architect, the man above everything that's going on in X-Men. And we wonder why it's all messed up. And we wonder why every character in the X-Men universe right now feels like a villain. There are so few that you can even root for anymore. There's a root cause of all of this. It's not House of X, Powers of 10, and the Jonathan Hickman, ideas that he incorporated in there. He certainly had a plan. I've read a lot of Jonathan Hickman stories. They've never turned out like this. Yes, he does have a lot of dark storylines and dark ideas, but good always wins in the end. And it's not winning here. That's why he left. And you have one of the card-carrying members of the Legion of Doofuses, Jordan White, and it's the blind leading the blind. He couldn't spell it out for you and I any better than he has with these last few interviews with Adventures in Portes. So he does not see anything wrong with that X-Men Green story that Jerry and he did together. He doesn't think the Nature Girl's a villain. He thinks that she's completely justified. She just went a little bit too far. But that's an anti-hero, right?